pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. There was an executive session held prior to this meeting. All commissioners attended. We discussed real estate issues, litigation, and some personnel items. Next is the minutes of our public meeting from the 25th.
Will they be approved?
I have one change on page 3 under community development. Third full paragraph. The gentleman's identified as Rob Murdoch. I believe it was Rob Murdocha. That's all I have.
Will they approve with that change?
Miklas is spelled wrong too on the first page.
Will they approve with that change?
Moved and seconded. Any further comments from the board? Any public comments? No, about the minutes. Yeah. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Next is public participation.
Good evening. May it please the board, my name is David Zaslow, and I'm the president and assistant chief of the Volunteer Medical Service Corps of Lower Merion and Narberth, also known as VMSC. Would you mind handing these out, please? I'm just going to hand you out a presentation packet to go along with some of the comments for you to review at your leisure. VMSC is proud to have served as the paramedic service for Lower Merion and Narberth for the past 66 years, in Conshohocken and West Conshohocken for the past 12 years, and for the past 10 years in Radnor Township. During the past 10 years in Radnor Township, we have provided state-of-the-art advanced pre-hospital emergency care, which is widely regarded as one of the best ambulance services in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. As VMSC understands it, Radnor Township is poised to discontinue its relationship with VMSC beginning in September of 2011 in favor of supporting the Radnor Fire Company in its effort to start its own ALS service. My role here tonight for you is to make sure that you have all the information you need at your disposal in order to make this important and highly delicate decision which affects the life safety of this community. Let me be very clear. This is not a struggle between Radnor Fire Company and VMSC. To the contrary, the two organizations have worked together seamlessly for the past decade and made a difference where it counts, which is in reducing morbidity and mortality in the streets of this township. And with this success, VMSC should not be viewed, as some have suggested, as an outsider, but rather as a partner in your community, because that's exactly what we are. We're part of your infrastructure. We provide you with dedicated vehicles serving Radnor Township, with medical equipment in those vehicles that's dedicated to Radnor Township, with the personnel to staff those vehicles that are highly trained and educated to save those lives in this township, and the administrative staff to keep everything moving forward. And it's the mission of VMSC to be sure that the residents, the businesses, and the visitors to Radnor Township enjoy the highest level of pre-hospital emergency care available in the most cost-effective manner. This is why I'm here tonight, because the residents of Radnor Township, myself included as one of them, have the right to know about the quality of the EMS service available to them 24/7, 365, and the cost associated with that state of readiness. On November 19th, I delivered to the Township Manager's Office a dynamic and cost-saving proposal for EMS in Radnor Township moving forward in 2011 and beyond. Unfortunately, I did not receive any response from the Radnor Township Manager's Office. But in the meantime, I have watched carefully and observed the Radnor Fire Company and its presentations that it's made over the last few weeks here in front of this board. And I came here tonight to set the record straight on any inaccuracies or misconceptions, and to be sure that the community knows that it has or should have a choice in its EMS provider, particularly when the community is going to be asked to bear the expense under one proposal to start up a new ALS service in the community as compared to the other proposal, which I'm going to outline for you now, which we're saying we're not asking for any money, and in fact, you can put money back in the bank. Let me give you a quick background where things stand currently. Currently, there is a tripartite relationship between Radnor Fire Company, Norbith, VMSC, and Radnor Township. And under that relationship, both companies, Radnor Fire Company and VMSC, respond to ambulance calls, and because the law and the industry standards, only one of those companies can bill for the service. As a result, we've contracted with Radnor Fire Company that they will do the billing, and that when they get the revenues from that billing, we get a certain flat fixed fee per call back from the revenues that are generated. That averages approximately $375 per call. Some calls it's a little more, some a little less, depending on the circumstances. The problem is that the split of the billing between the two companies ends up resulting in that both organizations cannot cover the expenses of providing the service because there's just not enough money to go around. And over the past 10 years, and you have the information and the financials in your packet, VMSC has subsidized Radnor Township to the tune of over $1 million and is still subsidizing Radnor Township approximately $100,000 a year for its paramedic service. This is despite the township's very generous efforts over the last couple of years to support both Radnor Fire Company and VMSC. A couple of weeks ago, it was suggested here that Radnor Township has been financing VMSC for many years. Not the case. 2 years ago, the township endeavored to provide VMSC with $25,000 per year, which it has done in 2008 and in 2009, and has agreed in principle to do in 2010. That was the first time that the township actually used its funds to support anything operated by VMSC. So let me come straight out and give you my proposal. VMSC will provide to you complete BLS, ALS, and transport service to the community 24/7, 365 at no cost to this township. We'll provide the personnel, which has a cost of approximately $600,000 per year in payroll and benefits. We'll provide the ambulance, which is a box ambulance, fully equipped, cost approximately $160,000. We'll provide the medical direction, which at VMSC consists of 4 board-certified emergency medical physicians and a team of clinical care committee members who are all experienced and licensed paramedics and nurses. And in return, we're not asking for any cash. The only consideration we're asking for from you is that you give our 2 people on that crew a place to hang out either in this building or at the Public Works facility, and that you continue, as you've always done, to pay for the fuel for the truck that provides the service.
Can I ask you a question that's perplexing me?
Yes.
The fire company came in last week or the time before and said they lose money because they're subsidizing you. You just said you're losing money. So I'm a little perplexed as to why you would want to continue a relationship where you lose money. I understand the goodwill and the service element of all that, but
And I'll explain that to you right now.
okay.
As I said before, when both sides bill and there's only one pot of money and both sides are taking out of that pot, it doesn't cover the expenses that both organizations incur. If one party does it, the return in the revenue from billing for the calls for service covers the expense.
Are we
So
sending,
VMS
so when you go to a call, does somebody from the fire company go out and somebody from,
The Radnor Fire Company ambulance responds and a medic responder vehicle, which is not a transport vehicle from my organization.
so we're sending
responds.
2?
Yes.
And the way it becomes a non-losing operation is under the proposal you have only 1 goes out.
Under the proposal that we provide you with ALS and transport.
Right,
only-
but
yes.
right, instead of having a Radnor Fire Company vehicle go out and a Narberth ambulance vehicle go out, then somebody bills and they only pay essentially, the payer only pays essentially for 1 vehicle
Correct,
to go out.
correct.
So the logic here is having just one vehicle go out.
Correct. One vehicle that's ALS equipped and ready to operate. And what we're asking for is the ability, if you choose us to be that one ALS vehicle, we're going to bill for those calls. We will cover the expenses from the revenues generated, and we're asking you to be able to conduct an EMS fund drive in Radnor Township on an annual basis, just as it's done now, which will not compete with the fire company in terms of its fire drive, but just an EMS fund drive. And between those elements, we'll be able to make ourselves whole, save the township its tax dollars in what it's poised to do. And I just want to repeat that because I think it's very important, and I think I have a larger audience I'm saying this to. The township will not have to increase its tax base for EMS services under this proposal. The township will not have to draw from its current tax revenues to pay for EMS services under this proposal. The township will not incur any capital costs for the startup or reorganization of EMS services in Radnor Township if it goes with this proposal. The township will not make any payments to VMSC, including the $25,000 that it has previously been making for the 24/7, 365 service, and the township will be able to save the money that it currently has earmarked for Radnor Fire Company's ambulance if it chooses to go with VMSC. I hope I've taken enough of your time. I hope that you will seriously give due consideration to this proposal and that you will avoid the risks that are naturally associated with removing one organization that is at the peak of its performance and widely recognized as such in favor of another organization who is just starting out. Although they're good people there is a learning curve associated with starting out, and that learning curve can be an expensive one, not just monetarily. Any questions?
I have two.
Yes.
And I tend to be somewhat of a cynical person because I grew up in New York. Why do you think Radnor Fire Company wants to do this? And other than, again, the goodwill, why do you guys want to do this? I mean, at the heart of it, it seems to me, and this is where the cynicism comes in, there must be money to be made here for one or the other by taking it on.
Well, just like Radnor Fire Company, VMSC is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. So the mission of the
let's be clear. A nonprofit is a tax status. It doesn't
Correct.
mean you don't make money.
Correct. But our mission is to provide emergency services, and that's where our over 60 volunteers put in over 6,800 hours a year in that charitable mission of providing emergency service. We supplement our volunteer staff with approximately 27 career staff members because, as you've heard before from Radnor Fire Company, you'll hear this at any municipality meeting, volunteerism's on the decline. It's more and more difficult to get volunteers to come out, and we have to supplement the service when the volunteers are at school, work, taking care of their family, whatever the case may be. So we do it because that's what we've done for 66 years. We enjoy being a partner in this community. And it's also not a secret that, we have mutual aid with Lower Merion. You have to by law. And the two communities work very well together in providing that EMS service. Radnor Fire Company's charter is as a fire company. They recently have gotten some people who are trained as paramedics, and they desire to run their own paramedic service. I understand that. Don't begrudge that. Just want to make sure that this body here understands what it's undertaking, what the costs are, going in one direction versus what the savings are going in another direction.
Can I ask a question? Is the reasoning behind having two units go out to calls, under the current situation, is that a timing issue? Where are you located? In Narberth?
No. We have a division in Radnor Township. It's actually located at Bryn Mawr Hospital right next to the township, and our truck comes out of there. The only reason you have two trucks responding is because they're two separate organizations. So we pay for our truck, our equipment, our people, and we send that paramedic out. That paramedic meets up with the Radnor Fire Company's ambulance, and he or she hops in the back of that truck with their equipment, and it becomes a mobile emergency room.
It sounds really inefficient.
I was going to say, what's the logic? What's the logic of that? It doesn't intuitively. It sounds silly.
It's been around forever. There are multiple models of how EMS is provided, from independent ambulance companies like VMSC to hospital-based. In fact, in Delaware County, I think you heard here a week or so ago that you're the only community, I'm a resident here, we are the only community that doesn't have its own ALS service. That's not exactly accurate. In fact, most of Delaware County has volunteer ambulance services, BLS ambulance services, either freestanding or as part of the fire department, and the paramedics come out of the hospital-based systems, either at Mercy, Fitzgerald, Delaware County Memorial, or elsewhere. So you're not the only community not to have your own in-house, if you will, ALS service that's born and bred here in Radnor Township.
David, a question on the history of this, because as I recall, I think it was back in the 80s, was it Bryn Mawr Hospital that provided the paramedic?
It was. Mainline Health provided you with your paramedic service up until 2001, and they got out of the business because they weren't making any money.
So at that point, VMSC offered to provide these services to Radnor.
We were actually approached and asked if we would be interested in doing that, and being a good neighbor, we said yes.
So for a long time, you've provided this service, and I think everyone's satisfied with the service. I guess I have some logistic questions. You mentioned that you need a place to park your vehicle and house your EMTs. What's the preference there, and accessibility? Talk about that a little bit so we have
Sure.
a better idea.
As with all EMS response, the key is to try and centrally locate yourself within the district so that you can minimize the response time, because in life-saving, in life-threatening emergencies, minutes are critical. So looking at either this building or the Public Works building, our operational staff feels that either one of those would be a sufficient location in order to maximize response times within the community, but we're also open to other ideas.
Bob Zinkowski and Bill, I believe we budgeted around $100,000 in the current budget to help Radnor Ambulance take on this. Is that?
That's in the ballpark. I
Yeah,
don't
it was-
have that
I thought it
number
was around 100.
specifically memorized, but
The increase
it
was
was
100. And
that
this was the
included
jumpstart?
capital and the ALS.
Oh, okay. Well, everything I'm hearing is interesting. I feel like we made a decision at our budget meeting, because it was part of a budget meeting, that could have an effect on the emergency care in the township. And I have a feel, maybe it was a good decision, I don't know. I think it might be worthwhile for the board to hear this
No,
discussion
I agree
at the
with you, John.
next
I'd
meeting.
like to see a side-by-side comparison of the various proposals, the pros and cons of both. Because perhaps we only got and I think, look, nothing, I don't see Dave out there tonight, but, we may have gotten a single perspective on the situation. We're hearing, in my opinion, an intriguing alternative perspective. I just don't know, and I think we ought to look at them, Bob, and compare the alternatives and see the pros and cons of both.
Well, Bob, you looked at this, and your recommendation, we go with Radnor?
Being that, I know months ago, we were supposed to get a proposal from Narberth, and we never came. So then I know on the 19th, it came and was directed to the board. So the assumption is that, similar to Bryn Mawr Fire, that, whatever the manager says, just go right to the board. So, I mean, it was addressed to all the board members. So, the issue is, I guess, I don't think there's ever been an issue with the quality of the service from Narberth at all. So I think with,
Do
the
you have an answer
conversation
for Bob
this
as to why you
evening.
didn't get into a proposal?
I really don't want to get into a spat with the township manager here, but I've attempted to contact township manager by phone, by email, and with this proposal, and I've not heard back from the office. There was no timeline set on the proposal. That was when Mr. Zinkowski first arrived here from Ohio. He was trying to understand the nature of the services that were being provided here, and a lot of information was forthcoming. During that interim time, we did work out the extension, and that was our primary goal, because as we sit here today, we actually don't have a signed contract. We've approved it. You have approved it recently, but we didn't have a signed contract, and our primary goal was to get back on track and then look at the long term. As soon as we got a word that you approved the continuation of the service, we put our proposal together, and you have it.
I'd like to recommend that we send this to the Public Safety Committee to do a side-by-side comparison. We have the current budget is the worst case, so we don't have to be worried about that. And Hank, would you pick that up?
Bill, in your Bill or Bob, is public safety the right place, or they need support from you, Bill, or somebody on your staff to look at the financials?
Public safety's fine, I'll just participate as needed.
Okay.
Is there a timing issue? Does this have to happen, or we're going to be under service with VMSE until mid-year 2012, 2011, is that right?
I promise you, we won't leave you in a lurch, because if I call 911, I want an ambulance to come to my
But
house.
Bob,
But
to your,
right now, you're contractually obligated through the middle of the year.
It's, if and when that extension is signed, it'll obligate us through July 31st of 2011, yes.
But Bob, does Radnor Fire Company have to make any sort of commitments in advance under the assumption that they're picking this up, to your knowledge?
Well, I think there would be planning involved in that, but, I just find it
Planning,
very,
but it-
very, very interesting, the conversation this evening, so.
Yeah, I don't think it's complicated enough that it needs to go to a subcommittee,
You know
because
what,
it's
I tend to agree with you. I mean, I'm happy to
Yeah.
take it on and do at least operational side-by-side comparison, and then Bill could do the financial side-by-side. I mean, it
Okay.
seems pretty simple.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to oversimplify it, but I think essentially the Radnor Fire Company is going to tell us a startup cost and some qualitative description of transition, meaning 'cause they have 0 paramedics now, is that right?
They have people in their company that are certified, but they're not allowed to use them as such.
Okay, so there's some kind of transition to a full status, I don't know what that term would be.
A licensed ALS
So
provider.
what we just have to
Can I
decide
just,
is,
before you?
no, let me finish, please, Kevin,
All right, I
I'm
just
sorry.
want to, but I don't want to lose a thought, just come back.
All right, so we have to decide how much additional money it's going to cost and what is essentially the learning curve for this, and then we decide whether that is good or bad. And I think the benefit to having it in Radnor is that we're contained in Radnor. When we're investing resources, we're investing it in Radnor, but it's going to come at a cost of additional startup and a learning curve, and we just have to make a decision based upon those 3. That's the way I see it.
The people that are trained in the Radnor Fire Company, but are not able to do that now, if Radnor took it over, do they move from being volunteers to paid employees?
I can't, and it wouldn't be appropriate for me to speak as to how they plan to change their infrastructure from a BLS transport ambulance to an advanced life support ambulance. It's as if the Radnor Fire Company's president explained last week, there's a large difference in the quality and quantity of care and the knowledge that's necessary when somebody falls down and hurts their leg versus when they're having a heart attack and they go into cardiac arrest, what needs to be done. You need the personnel that are trained and licensed by the state to do that. You need 24/7 medical direction and oversight. You need the equipment, all of that, which I've outlined what that costs. And there is a learning curve associated with that.
I don't
And
think it's probably not appropriate for us to try and put you in that position where you're explaining Radnor's side of it. You've done your explaining on what you folks do, and I think if we have that side-by-side comparison, and if necessary, have representatives from both sides come in and argue their positions. I'm happy to do that.
Is it possible to do this at the next meeting? Too soon, or?
Next
I
meeting's the
think it's
budget.
probably too soon. Plus, that's the last meeting of the
Okay,
year.
well, like you said, it's
And
kind of.
recognize, too, there's one additional thing that we haven't discussed, is I've had some conversations with folks in Tredyffrin and part of the task force, that this also fits together with that task force and what their long-range goals are for it's not really a district, but it's sort of like a district. So we need to understand all that stuff and put it together. And I apologize for not returning your call. I was out of town.
No problem. And you're correct about that. All
Yeah.
EMS companies have, by state law, obligations to provide mutual aid to their surrounding and neighboring communities. And we have that in place
Right.
when our Radnor truck here goes to Tredyffrin and
Yes.
Berlin when necessary in order to provide them with backup services.
Yeah, I think there's enough questions that we should do this
Yeah,
a little
I
more
think if we
detail.
take the next 30 to 45 days to bring the information together, we'll be in a position to then discuss it rationally.
Sure, and I would suggest that as part of that meeting, it would be a separate night from a board meeting night, and then have the Radnor Fire Company in as well. And then this way, the two of them can.
Do you think it needs a separate meeting, Bob, or?
I think it would be good to be able to spend the time, so this way, it's heard out, you're not against the wall of time, and then this conversation doesn't take place at 10:30 at night either, so that this
Fair enough.
way,
It just.
it can start and then have, go
to-
through the
to ex-
conversation.
look, I can't speak for the rest of these folks. To the extent it can be on a regularly scheduled meeting, that's preferable, because I block those dates.
Yeah, and I have to say, if it's gonna come out of a regular meeting, then I think John's initial recommendation is the way to go, which is to have a subcommittee.
Yeah, I think that's why we need to do it. That's why we have subcommittees, we're trying to use it.
Happy to do it and schedule it.
All right, well,
Thanks.
that's my thought.
Thank you for your
Thank you.
presentation.
My card is in your packets, whoever would like to contact me. Thank you.
Thanks. More public comment?
Good evening, Jerry Linden, resident of the Township, also a member of the CBFAC committee, but I'm representing myself this evening. Had a few questions about the budget, if this is the appropriate time to pose those. Okay. I did attend the first 3 hours of the meeting last week and caught most of the next 3.5 hours watching it on replay. But there were 2 or 3 items, large items, that jumped out at me that, having spent a lot of hours looking at prior budgets and a lot of hours looking at the current budget, looked like something that needed a little bit more information or discussion, at least for myself and perhaps for the board as well. So the first of those 2 items relates to the budget reductions that were proposed at the last meeting. And what I had trouble tracking was the item for $372,000 that was labeled the OPEB funding reduction and postponing to future years. I was just a little confused of exactly what line item that related to. And I know when we spent the time as the committee looking through the budget, there was a lot of confusion between OPEB and compensated absences and the pension fund itself. So I wasn't able to tick that number out. There is a similar item in the budget for $317,000, but I'm not sure if that's actually the same item or not. So I don't know if that's a question to discuss a little bit tonight or just to pose it for clarification, but let me stop at that one.
Why don't we, Bill, can you answer that off the top of your head, or do you want
Yeah.
to do a little research?
No, I mean, I can, it is the same item. And the issue is that the township currently does not have any accounting structure or fund established to send the OPEB set-asides to. So right now, any kind of set-aside the township does for that obligation exists within a transfer out line item in the general fund. So it's hard to trace it exactly because it's just one line item in the general fund. I think our goal is in the near term is to actually establish a fund and start accounting for these things within their own fund. And the amount that was designated in the 2010 budget and then the amount that was initially presented in the 11 budget are amounts that were tied to specific individuals retiring and not necessarily at the total, addressing the total obligation, which is a much, much larger number. But it was a means to start setting the money aside. So that's maybe the difficulty in trying to track it back. I know, Jerry, when we were going through as part of the work you were doing with CBFAC, reconciling that to the financial statements and trying to get a good grasp of what the obligation was and how to fund it.
Okay. Well, so is that for compensated absences or for the OPEB liability? 'Cause I think
Both. It would be a set aside to start setting to fund future obligations for compensated absences and health care and other contractually obligated payments that the township would have to pay.
Okay. So by removing that now, does that remove the provision for any compensated absences that need to be paid out for employees leaving the township in the current year?
It basically be a pay-as-you-go for the compensated absence portion.
Right, and it would be, so it would be it would be an unbudgeted variance for the current year.
Yes.
Okay. So, okay, well, that clears that up. But the one thing I wasn't sure if well, I think that's one, just to be aware of that. So any payment for compensated absences would be a non-budgeted variance. The other thing I wasn't sure that it might be is an adjustment to take advantage of some of the pension funding options that you had considered a few meetings ago and decided not to take. So those are potentially still on the table to consider. And I remember when there was the discussion about that, there was the potential to revisit it when the budget came out. And I wasn't sure if that related to that item. It doesn't, but I think that's still an item potentially to take a look at. Okay, then the one other big item that jumped out was the change in the the current budget to the prior actual for the business privilege tax. In hearing the discussion about that during some of the meetings, a lot of it was attributed to prior revenues being a result of audits and the feeling that, you know, that's caught up and that wouldn't be the case going forward. But in the budget, and this, I don't know if you have the budget now, it's on page 39, there's two different line items. There's one for business privilege tax, there's one for business privilege audits. So, you know, I understand the audits moving from almost 600,000 collected to only budgeting 350, again, being conservative on the audits. But the business privilege tax itself moves from 5.3 million down to 4 million. And I think this was actually the item that you know, really triggered the surprise results for the, you know, as we're projecting the end of 2010. So that just jumps out at me. You know, to the extent I understand there's confidentiality with the taxpayers and so forth, but it just jumps out at me that that's a big difference. And, you know, is there some reason to believe outside of the audits that there'll really be a reduction of that magnitude?
Yeah, if I could.
Yeah, Bill.
Okay, that's actually an excellent point. The two different lines, the audit line represents the penalties associated with an audit finding. Any of the back BPT tax revenue associated with those settlements that would have otherwise been paid into the BPT regular line, that's where it got posted. So the audit line is not capturing the full amount of what those settlements are, just the over and above what the BPT would have otherwise been. So that's why the 2010 number looks so high. There is a good portion of that is made up from audit settlements, and next year not projecting that. But that's a really good point, a good question.
Okay.
And Jerry, I'd just like to point out that in 2009, it was 3.6 million. So 4 million doesn't sound so conservative. You know?
Right. Yeah, although if you look back at the other years, I mean, that was a
In the
one-year.
boom years,
that
it was
a
way
one-year-
higher,
Right,
right.
it was a one-year dip.
But, I mean,
and-
frankly,
Yeah.
from my perspective, I'm thrilled to see a conservative number there. I would be worried if we were not conservative in those projections.
It's
But-
not
but also-
conservative. I mean, you know, we had some big settlements that we don't expect to get this year, so
Right.
it's right on target.
Well, but also, I think in 2007 and 8, did we not lump in those settlements? So those numbers, of course, starting at the pinnacle in 2007, with audits included, we had a very large number, especially in 2008, 6.4 million. So, but it's a 20% drop in 2011 over 2010.
Well, at the same
believe it
time, a year ago, you know, we said we thought I think the budgeted number a year ago was 4 million and it came in 5.3. So, you know, obviously there's a lot more scrutiny in the numbers now, but I guess I understand the explanation. I think it might be something to take a little bit closer look at between now and next week to hone in that number, because it really is a big number and I think has some impact on the budgeting decisions.
And I'll take an opportunity to say that my hope is that any money that is found in audits is not used for operating. The GFOA recommends that if you find money in audits, that money is used to either pay down debt or for one-time expenses, not operating. But in the past, we've used it for operating. And I think that's a shame, because we've left a lot of liabilities on the table, like the OPEB, the GASP 45, the $45 million liability there, the uncompensated absences that were off the books for many years, now are on the books. We still have no funding mechanism for that. We have a lot of pay-as-you-go, but I don't think we have a way to pay. That's my concern.
Yeah, I'd agree. Okay, well, that's
you,
the
John.
point, just looking at those three things, I think would
Great.
be worthwhile between now and next week.
Thanks for your input.
Okay,
Bob or
thanks.
Bill, just a point of clarification. Are we going to get a final document for next Monday's meeting? Okay, thanks.
Any further public comment? Well, let's move along. Committee reports, finance and audit. Kevin?
The first item on the agenda, and only item on the agenda, is the list of bills payable identified as 2010-12A. Grand total of $516,626.64, and these bills have been approved by the respective department heads, verified and processed by the Finance Department within the 2010 budgetary limits that we imposed this calendar year. So I make a motion to approve.
Second?
Motion made and seconded. Any questions by the board?
Yeah, I think Kevin missed, I think it was 514, and I believe you said 516.
514.
Any public questions, comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So we jump all the way down to
No,
old
we're going
business.
to Public Works and Engineering.
Oh, you have something?
We have one item
Oh,
on
that's
the,
right. Yeah.
on the agenda, we're putting on the agenda, we have an emergency bid for a hazardous tree. There's a dead oak tree in the township right away along the 300 block of Windsor Avenue. This tree has been on the list for removal since early 2010. Unfortunately, we were unable to put a street tree removal contract out to bid this fall due to budget constraints. During the recent storm on December 1st, 2010, a large lead of the tree came down as a result of high winds. The remainder of the tree is still upright, but in my opinion, it is posing a hazard to the property of 312 Windsor Avenue and should be removed as soon as possible. Under the ability to go out an emergency contract, we got 3 bids, and the low bidder was Arbor Way Tree Service for $3,850, and I'll move the approval of this emergency bid.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Further questions?
You know, just to interject here for a second, this tree is in the first ward, and when it first came to light, Bill Hagan's crew was out taking down the lead or the large limb that had come down, and Bob and I spoke with Bill, and he indicated that the rest of the tree was in danger of coming down, and it is one of those trees which has been marked with an X by the Public Works Department, so the township's aware that it's in bad shape, and if we let it stay up and it comes down during the winter and hits the house, which apparently it's in danger of doing, then we'd be liable for the damages. So whereas I was willing to wait until the new year to have this be part of all of the tree work that we need to have done, this truly is an emergency situation, so I'd recommend that we go ahead with this.
I just had a point of understanding more than anything else, because we got the 3 proposals. The winning bidder is leaving the stump cut flush. The high bidder was going to grind the stump. I think that's slightly different. Now, I'm not saying go with the high bidder, but why would they have, do we just give them some sort of, just take the tree down and let them bid like that, or?
They wanted the tree to be taken down, that's what it was. They included that in there, but the difference is almost
Yeah, I agree.
$3,000.
Yeah,
But I
it's
think that
significant.
option was put in there, but I believe Bill had asked them to remove the tree, that we would take care of the stump later.
Okay.
Yeah, our guys have a stump grinder from what I remember.
And Bob, you're in favor of this?
Yes, I believe anytime a tree like this is in danger, and this is a very large tree, and the liability upon the township, I think we should proceed with this.
Any further board comment? Any public comment? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Bob, we have numerous trees throughout the township with an X on them, and we usually go out in the fall and bid and do that. How long are we putting that off for?
At the next week from this week, in front of the Board of Commissioners, there'll be authorization to go out for bid
Go out
for
for
that
bid, and we'll do
particular
it early
project.
next year?
That's correct.
All right, thank you. That's it under Public Works.
Thank you, Bill. We're down to old business.
Actually, John, I have one just thing under personnel administration. The manager's given me a notice that the The Safety Committee was able to get certification renewal this year, which will result in a 5% discount in our workers' comp premium. Bob, is there any other comment on that? So I appreciate the work of the
So
Safety Committee. on
5%
that.
versus this year, 5% versus what we budgeted.
I think that's what we've budgeted, we anticipated.
So you
receiving
budgeted based
that.
on getting this
Correct,
discount. Okay.
Correct.
Yeah, so many thanks to that committee for their work in getting us this certification.
Thanks. Under old business, I have a question, a query, something for the board to discuss. We recently had the Ethics Commission issued their finding. So I'm going to assume that that means that maybe now our insurance company will get off the dime and do something for us. Assuming that happens, this board needs to consider how those funds should be utilized, whether we just roll them back into the general fund, since a large amount of that money was spent on legal fees anyway, or do we want to use it, as John mentioned earlier, as part of the one-time, under that concept? But it's something we need to discuss.
Well, I thought about this a lot this weekend, and I would like to have some discussion about one of the cuts that we made was a 10% across the board cut to our nonprofits. And, I'm uncomfortable with the effect that that's having on particularly the library. And I would like, in light of the fact that we have the $55,000 added into our budget from the Ethics Committee, and that we may have some other funding added into our budget going into 2011 from an insurance payment, I would like to revisit that cut and propose that we make it a 5% cut and not a 10% cut. I think it'd make a substantial difference in the type of service decrease that our residents will see. At the 10% level, the library, for example, is losing $82,000, and our residents will see, one night a week being closed, a day a week during the summer being closed. I mean, really, in my level, pretty drastic changes for people, for our asset that is the most used in the township of all of our public services. And I would feel more comfortable, since we did have, it's about the same amount, the 55 that we received, and cutting that 10% in half. I would like to discuss changing that from 10 to 5%.
I have a different opinion. A couple points I want to make. According to the Ethics Commission's finding, the former manager, David Bayshore, paid out about $1.5 million in lump sum payments that were not proper, and a large majority of that money was taken from the sewer fund. In fact, it was taken from a maintenance line in the sewer fund. So in essence, there's at least, and I don't have all the detail, but I believe about $750,000 plus was taken from this maintenance line in the sewer fund. And while it's not as nice to think of it this way, that money needs to be put back because that work needs to get done. And just like I had said earlier, under GFOA, when you find money that's unexpected, it's best to either pay down debt or use it for the unexpected and not use it for operations. And increasing the funding in any operational area is just the opposite of what the GFOA recommends. So if we do find any money in restitution or in insurance claims, I would strongly suggest that money get put back into the sewer fund, because I believe that fund is grossly underfunded. I believe that any incidents this year or next year could put us completely in the red in that fund. We know that it costs about $250 a foot to do sewer work. We have pumping stations in the township that are 40 years old, and they cost a lot of money to replace. And what I'm afraid of is that if we don't properly fund that, the sewer fund itself, that when these large capital projects come up, it'll mean more debt for the taxpayer. So I think it's best to take any lump sum receipts that we receive in restitution to put it back where it came from, which was in fact the sewer fund. And this was clearly indicated in the Ethics Commission finding. So while I'd like to help the library, I don't think that's the right thing to do. We hurt the sewer over 10 years. The sewer system, the taxpayers expect their sewer system to be fully functional. We charge fees for the sewer system year over year. They're paid separately. They're not part of the taxes that we pay. And yet that money was taken to be used for bonuses. So I think it's the right thing to do, put it back in the sewer fund.
We could make a similar case, though, for OPEB. You know, the fact that we're not funding OPEB, so that's a liability we have hanging out there. So anyway, I'd ask all of you to think about it. It doesn't even have to be part of our budget discussion per se, but we can deal with it if and when we do see some geld.
It has to be part of our budget discussion in that what we pass on next week has an allotment for those nonprofits. And that, if we're going to change that, we should do it now.
Well, I would be opposed to changing anything on the basis of speculation and how much money we would get, and there's still risk, although I think the risk is diminished.
And this board could always approve a supplemental.
Right, that's right.
If we wanted to.
We have no visibility to how we're going to perform next year on the revenue line yet. We have a lot of confidence in our real estate taxes, but quite frankly, in the current state of economy, maybe some folks are not going to be able to pay, as you know, and we may have more folks go delinquent. But I think it's premature until we get visibility on the revenue line to alter the expense line.
Well, I guess I'm making the suggestion, assuming that in a week, by the time we hit next meeting, we have clarity about what that payment is.
But even if you had that, you won't have clarity on your realty transfer tax. You won't have clarity, excuse me, on your business privilege tax. You won't have clarity on your licenses and permits. And I think we ought to let some time elapse into next year so that we have better visibility. And as Bill has discussed with us, the goal is to give us on a regular basis next year, year-to-date actuals and year-to-date forecast, full year forecast, so we can adjust. And as John suggested, if we get to the end of the first or second quarter and we find out there's a lot more revenue here than we thought we were going to have, then we can go back and say, here's some extra money. They're not going to say, I can't envision a scenario where they say no, but I would not want to commit to making a pledge to fund something when I'm not sure I can deliver on it.
Yeah, let me make one more comment on, what we're getting restitution for and where that money came from. Last year, we had an unusually high legal fee to pay out, $400,000 connected to this case, which would have been in our operational budget, which would have which would have made it easier for us to fund the nonprofits that we fund at a level which is not extraordinarily high, I might add. I mean, it's pretty par for the course, actually low compared to our neighbors. Because of this case, because of this litigation, we had to spend almost $500,000 litigating. And I see this, if we get an insurance payment and the ethics decision, which we have received, as starting to make us whole for some of those losses that we had to take from our nonprofit to pay for this episode. And I received an email over the weekend from a resident who put it pretty succinctly. She said, I can't believe that I'm looking at this budget and we're paying so much money in legal fees and cutting the library. I feel, she felt betrayed. And I understand that. So for me, it makes sense to take some of this money and, the things that we've had to, the things that mean something to people on an everyday basis, we've had to take away from that because of these expenses. I would feel more comfortable if not fully refunding them, but if we took some of that money and put it back towards those uses.
I have a question for John Rice. John, the insurance claim that we filed with our carrier was for the recovery of funds that were misappropriated by the former manager. Or was the claim filed to recover legal expenses in that pursuit?
No, the claim, I don't remember the exact amount. I think it was in the order of $700,000 or $800,000, was for the documented bonuses that the former manager took for himself and awarded for other employees without board approval. There was a category of credit card transactions in that. Most of what was documented in the Margolis report. Not all of that, but that was basically the bulk of it. It was money that was misappropriated, misspent, wasn't properly authorized, wasn't properly approved. That was the claim that we have that's before our insurance carrier.
Okay, so if we were to receive any payment on that insurance claim, it's in order to restore us on what was taken from the sewer fund. So I go back to, let's put the money back to where it belongs. This board made a decision to spend $200,000-300,000 on the investigation. That should have no effect on the sewer fund. Again, when I pay my sewer bill, I expect that every dollar of that sewer bill, that I pay, to be used to maintain the sewer system. And when that money was taken from the sewer system without my knowledge as a taxpayer, I became a victim of a crime. And if we receive any restitution, that restitution should go back to the victims, and there are 33,000 victims in this township of that crime.
So I think we hit the library. I think the library was cut a little more than I'd like to last week. So in hindsight, I'd like to try to find money, even if it's a zero-sum game, and restore some of the money to the library. And I understand that we have that capability next week. Is that correct? Very good. So I would like to restore some to the library.
And as far as the windfills, any money we get in, my idea is that we put it in capital. Capital is completely is funded very, very lightly, and there's a lot of projects aren't getting done. We're not going to be able to do. But I would think that if I get any extra money in, and if the economy improves, I'm going to be pushing to put it in capital and capital and capital, so we don't have to go out next year, the year after that to borrow $7 or $8 million that we can start paying as we go on capital. So that would be where I want to see any money that we get in put in the capital budget. As far as what Elaine had to say, you know, I was taken aback by the $82,000 cut to the library, and I would support cutting that back to 5% across the board and support Elaine on that.
I'd like to hear recommendations from staff if and when the money comes in.
Maybe if I can, just on that, just so the board understands that, you know, whatever money comes in, we're still at $1 million deficit that we're operating under. You know, when you have the other organizations that came forward and said, you know, it's tough, but they're willing to go into their reserves to get through this, you know, I guess it's tough to be able to say we've got to fund different agencies, and it's not where I'm anti-library or any of these other groups, because they're all assets to the community. But again, we're still in $1 million deficit that we're still operating under, and before we even have money, we're giving it back out again instead of trying to reduce that deficit, because really we're only pushing the problem to next year and the years in the future instead of trying to resolve some of these particular issues. So just to make the board aware of that we have not started to turn this financial ship in a direction where we need to start going to.
I guess if I could, another part of the process, and this may be bigger than just the more immediate question of whether we restore the funding to the various non-for-profits, is maybe getting a better understanding on where they stand financially, because understanding that the cuts that have been proposed would impact them, but I'm not sure we understand or have seen the numbers from these different organizations on just what that means and what their fiscal health is, because it could turn out that their fiscal health might actually be better than ours, and we don't know it. It hasn't been part of the process, part of the evaluation when it's been determined how much to contribute to the various organizations. So maybe as we're thinking about this, adding that to the process.
And also, I mean, I mentioned a zero-sum game, so I'd like to see the capability. I'd like to see if we wanted to move a handful of tens of thousands of dollars back into the library, what we would lose for that. So, and that doesn't adversely affect, and that the things that you identified, Bob. I was speaking for a zero-sum game, so I'd like to see options.
Would we want to factor in then to the default on the loan of the library and then the
I
township
am,
eating
and
that?
that's part
and
of,
would we
I mean, I have a
factor
number in
that
my
number
head.
in?
Yes,
Okay.
I have a number in my head as to where that should be, and I've
Okay.
taken that into consideration. But even with that number, I'm just speaking for me, in hindsight, I wish that we had not cut the library as much as we did.
We just percolate on this for a week, and then when we pass the budget next week, make a decision on it? I mean, this is not going to require re-advertising or anything like that?
You
Right.
could.
Okay.
Yeah, as long as you're not changing the millage rate or you're moving around line items in the budget itself, that's fine.
Thank you. Any other old business?
I just have one thing I'd like to discuss. I brought this up at the last meeting. I think it's important to keep this out there. As many of us know, that the State Ethics Commission did have a ruling on the order number 1563. This concerns David Bayshore, the former township manager. He was found in violation of Section 1103, which is using his public authority for private pecuniary benefit. And in this report, which is also located on the State Ethics Commission website, it details all the years in which the manager was investigated and all the monies that he essentially paid himself without authority.
Didn't you discuss this at the last meeting?
And I will continue to discuss this until I'm done discussing this. In the year 2000, the manager paid himself $28,000, and in 2001, he paid himself $30,000 in bonuses. This was done at the same time that the manager negotiated his employment contract with the township. Normally, negotiations are done in good faith, and I'm not clear that there's any good faith when you're taking money at the same time you're asking for money without telling the person you're taking it. In 2002, it was $22,000. In 2003, it was $18,867. $17,500 in 2004, $17,000 in 2005, $17,000 again in 2006, $15,000 in 2007, and $15,000 in 2008. I bring this up because the Ethics Commission has ruled that the former manager is found in violation of the Ethics Commission, but this is not the same as a criminal investigation and a criminal prosecution. What I'm going to ask is that this board file a complaint with the Delaware County Prosecutor's Office, a private complaint, or ask and urge the Delaware County Prosecutor, Michael Green, to, in fact, investigate this as a crime. As far as I'm concerned, in my opinion, it's a crime, but it's really up to a district attorney to decide whether or not it's a crime. It's also up to the FBI and the state to decide if it's a crime. But as far as I'm concerned, money was taken without authority under public office, and in my mind, that's a high crime. And I would like to see justice, not only for the township administration, but also for the 33,000 residents of the township. Even if we get the money back, there's still, penalties under the criminal justice system. And I think it's only fair that we have equal justice under that system. And quite frankly, if you're a guy who steals money from someone on the street, you're probably going to go to jail for some time. And here we have a case where the manager allegedly has taken a lot of money over a long period of time. And I think it's important that those systems, that those criminal justice systems have their time and their say. So, personally, as a resident of this township, I'm going to encourage the district attorney to move forward and do something. If their decision is that there isn't a crime here, then that's their decision, and we can't do anything about that. But I took an oath of office, and my oath told me that I'd have to uphold the law, and part of that oath requires me to contact the authorities. I filed the ethics complaint 18 months ago. I didn't have very much support from the board at that time, and I didn't have any support from the board to go to the FBI. I have had about 18 months of working on this with the FBI, with the state, and devoting a lot of my personal time to this case, and I'd like to see that the authorities pursue it. I can't tell them what to do, but I'm urging them in public to please do what they can.
So are you going to make a motion then? You indicated you want the board to take action.
I would like the board to consider for the next meeting that we put something on the agenda to file a private criminal complaint with the Delaware County Prosecutor's Office.
Let's get an opinion back from John Rice on this.
That's-
Well, I think it's, at this point, at least as of tonight, we don't know without some conversation with the district attorney and the other law enforcement agencies where they're at. So I can provide some information to the board if you want to go down that path. It's something that, this is relatively, I mean, the Ethics Commission decision has not been out. They will not prosecute criminally. They've left it up in the air in terms of any other law enforcement agency. So I don't know, what the DA's office or what the federal prosecutor's goals are. I'll try to find that out before the next meeting, and I'll report back.
Thank you, John. Further new business.
I have an announcement. The Open Space Subcommittee that's looking at updating our open space plan, so not the open space as a whole, but the subcommittee that's working on our new plan, is holding a meeting, and their next meeting is Tuesday, the 14th, next Tuesday, at 7 p.m. in this Powys conference room, on the side of this room. It's open to the public, so if anybody'd like to come, you're welcome. And that's it.
And just a reminder that the fire company, the auxiliary, is having their breakfast with Santa this Sunday. Anyone would like to have a nice breakfast, they certainly stop over Sunday morning at the firehouse.
Motion to adjourn? Oh,
have public?
further public comment? I forgot. We do it twice.
Sarah Pilling, Garrett Hill. It is both appropriate and sad that the nonprofits need to come to the bar as the township is. The one thing that really struck me last week when they all made their presentations is how many of the organizations except one rely on volunteers. And what I heard Patty Booker say as the representative of the library is that they had 35 part-time people. I think it's time for the library to look to current librarians, past librarians, people who have an interest in it, and begin to use volunteers. I know it's tough. It's tough on those people who are earning money, but we're all in a bad place, and it really isn't going to get any better for a while anyhow. Hopefully in a couple of years it is. And it just really struck me that they had so many paid people and weren't trying to cultivate those people who either have experience or would like to have experience in being a librarian. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Susan Silverberg. I am a former staff member at the library. One thing Mrs. Pilling was talking about was getting more volunteers, and I can speak to that. Under the prior director before Mrs. Mulroy came, they made no outreach to get volunteers. In fact, there were incidents with the volunteers and trouble between Mrs. Cassini and those volunteers, so they didn't enjoy being there. Now, when I was a staff member, I went to school and I have a paraprofessional degree, and I certainly could have helped them with some of the tasks, but they weren't willing to assign those to me. I'm not saying that Mrs. Schaefer is incorrect in wanting to give some money to them, but when I started there, we had a program called the Work in Wayne Card. And since Governor Rendell got rid of Access Pennsylvania, and we did give them $80,000 one year, and I also talked with the director at Tredyffrin, we may have to go back to the system of where they have to, if you are not a resident of this township, you might have to pay. And that might be a possible talking point with Mrs. Mulroy and see if that's where she wants to go with it. So I thank you for listening to me, and I hope my comments have been helpful.
Thank you, Susan.
Sure.
John Osborne, the Township Treasurer. I just want to comment on Mr. Fisher's remarks. I want to endorse what Mr. Fisher had to say just recently. And as representing the taxpayers of Radnor Township, I want to point out that the $700,000 that came out of the SOAR fund was not a tax-deductible item, but yet it was used for activities that would have been tax-deductible. So each taxpayer in Radnor Township was shorted over $100 in a tax-deductible activity. That's all I have to say.
I move we adjourn.
Moved and second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Adjourned.